Talent in Cannabis is the Flower Hire podcast featuring candid conversations with leaders and professionals shaping the cannabis industry. Each episode goes beyond job titles to humanize executive careers, exploring real journeys, lessons learned, and what it truly takes to build and lead in cannabis. Flower Hire, Talent in Cannabis. Hi, this is David Belsky. Welcome to the Talent in Cannabis podcast. I'm your host. And we have an amazing guest today, Laura Jaramillo, from the founder of the management company Botany Bay, as well as the COO of nuEra Cannabis. Laura, thank you for joining.
Thank you, David. I'm excited to be here.
Tell me about what nuEra and what Botany Bay is today.
Yeah, so Botany Bay is the management company that was started by the nuEra kind of executive founding team to be able to adapt and grow and kind of bring all of the things that we've been learning to different setups in which maybe we're not the owners of a license, or we can bring in and manage it and bring all this expertise that we have been building. And so right now as a company, on the nuEra side, we've now reached 9 dispensaries in Illinois. We have a cap of 10, and so we have a license ready to go for that, and we're just working on nailing the real estate, which is one of the most important things for retail. And we have our big cultivation center and the brands that we've been developing there. But then on the Botany Bay side, we've been growing as we acquire different clients in different places. So we do have a nuEra store that we bought that we won in the lottery license in Kentucky. That store is up and operating in Frankfurt, the capital of Kentucky. And then we're working with Botany Bay, managing a cultivation facility that was the very first one to get up and running in the state, and the processor that just got approval a couple of days ago to start operating there as well. So the big name of the game for us is that kind of scaling and expansion from going from a single brand, a single state, to now running a couple of different brands and for the first time really operating significantly outside of our home state of Illinois, which is really a step function, right? It's been a little bit of growing pains as we get used to this brand new world of being a little bit of a mini MSO, I guess.
Whoa, you said it. So Illinois and Kentucky geography lesson, they do touch each other, don't they?
They do. They touch each other, and our cultivation operation in Illinois is all the way down in the southern tip of the state. It's in Carbondale, and so it's actually not far from the border with Kentucky. So the cultivation facility that we're managing in Kentucky, we placed not too far. It's right near Paducah, and it's only about an hour and change away from our facility. The idea being that we can kind of course, you can't cross state borders with cannabis, but you can cross state borders with talent and with know-how and with support from that facility. So when we bring someone else to come check out something at one of the facilities, they can visit both. We're building independent teams for the facility now, but especially in the build out phase, in the design phase, we used a lot of the ISO, that's our cultivation facility, a lot of the talent from our team there in the design process, in the build out process, et cetera. And so we've gotten a ton of support from that team that's been able to kind of travel back and forth easily there.
Well, and it's a great rep for those folks to have the opportunity to start a new facility from scratch, and it's so interesting. An hour and a half from each other, and it's like 4 hours down to Carbondale, right, on a good day, right?
No, that would be a very good day. No, if the Carbondale from Chicago is more like 6.5. And so, I keep joking that next time we build any facility, it has to be closer to a major airport, because that's turned out to be a lot of car time. Carbondale, at least you can take the Amtrak straight to, but Kentucky, we got to drive. So it's been a lot of car time this year.
Right. Well, you used to get calls done windshield time. So, what was your background before cannabis professionally, and do you do you have a cannabis story?
My cannabis story is a story of maybe you want to call it of love. I worked in media before. I started out my career as a journalist. I was a political journalist first. I then went into TV. I ran a TV show. I was the executive producer of a TV show called Efecto Naim, which was a little bit like, and it's topical now because 60 Minutes is blowing up, but it was a format similar to 60 Minutes, but for the Latin American market. So it was produced out of Washington, D.C., broadcast across like 23 countries in Latin America. And then with the guy that was the host and kind of star of that show, which is he's a well-known kind of intellectual. He and his son started a TV development company, and I came to work with them. I was the CEO of that company. And so we did development of like big budget TV projects and documentaries and media for the Latin American market primarily. So we'd be, working on projects with Amazon, Netflix, Disney, the big producers, but always with a Spanish speaking audience in mind. And so I was doing that. And meanwhile, my husband now, my long-term boyfriend at the time, and his dad had been the ones that started nuEra. Back in the day, it was NewMed, and they started it. And in 2019, we heard the news that the transition from medical to adult use was about to happen. And it was kind of an all hands on deck situation. I mean, the medical days in Illinois were really slow and sleepy and tough, but we knew that was going to be a big leap in problems and opportunities. And there was a lot of work to be done in a short amount of time. And so I said, you know what, I'll come and help out for a few months. A few months just sucked me in and turned into a few years. And so here we are, 6 years, and it's going to be 7 years this year. Since I made the jump. So yeah, I would say my career in cannabis was not, I think for a lot of people, it's a lifelong passion. They specifically sought out. I stumbled into it a little bit more than usual. I was always interested in drug policy. I'm Colombian originally. I immigrated to the US as a teenager and had I would call it a more like academic interest in drug policy stuff, but it wasn't, as it is for a lot of people, that a lifelong passion that
Sure.
I pursued. But I just, it was more like a family business emergency that I came to help out with.
What so when you're talking about the production of like often very large, pieces of content or films or series or documentaries for major networks and major streaming platforms, what is transferable into the cannabis industry that you've seen the most of, that prepared you the most?
I would say extreme adaptability. TV is like everything is an emergency. Everything is last minute and everything is very, especially in the kind of role that I had, it was very, let me put it this way. I've never been a specialist at anything. I'm always your like jack of all trades, like call it Jane of all trades. Like here's a problem no one knows how to fix. Like someone has to figure it out.
You're
Laura
like the
figures it
wolf
out type
in
of thing.
Pulp Fiction. I don't ever see
Yeah,
that.
there you go. So I think from that perspective, it was like that sort of extreme, like quick adaptability, right? In TV, it's just like, oh, I don't know. We have this like giant thing scheduled and all of a sudden it's pouring. And so we have to like rearrange the entire schedule. And turns out we needed a permit and no one knew we needed a permit and the police are here. Like that kind of
There's a
extreme,
million things
a
that
million
could
things. And
derail a
so
production. Yes,
and
that's
like related to this, like so much of it is like a lot of it will be like HR 1 second and like city permits the next second and like the budget the next second. It's like that sort of like all things all at once. The other thing, honestly, I had to do a lot of was reading contracts, which is a lot of what I do a lot of now too. So that was pretty good
that's
preparation too.
definitely transferable. So it was the
And dealing with characters that are very passionate about what they do, but a little bit crazy. And so TV has
that's your
that,
cut?
as does cannabis. So
Well, so that was your catalyst for getting involved for 3 months that turned into
mhm.
7 years, was when adult use passed. And and that was around that time, obviously, you talked about the rebranding, NewMed to nuEra, but how did adult use really change the strategy for the organization when that passed?
It changed everything. I mean, when I first joined nuEra, we had 3 medical stores. They were called NewMed at the time. Uh, it's crazy to even think about. I think we had less than 40 employees. We probably have around 300 now. We didn't have a marketing team or person. We didn't have HR. at all as a function in the company. We didn't even have a full-time like accounting person. Essentially all of our staff was the store staff directly. We didn't have when I first joined, we didn't have Google Map listings for the stores. It was very limited. Patients were tied to a specific location. And so the early challenges were challenges of rebranding. Obviously, we were new med. It was very medically focused. One of the first things that we did was rebranded and introducing the nuEra brand. Then just scaling the company, building all of the corporate functions that were necessary to make the company work at a higher volume and competition level, etc. And, we had a lot of challenges in the early days for a couple of reasons. One of them is the interest was so extreme. And so, we were dealing with lines down the block that no one knew how to handle at that volume and that speed.
For adult use, when adult use sales started.
For what that's the first day,
Yeah.
yeah, January 1st of
I
2020.
remember those videos I saw.
They were crazy. They were crazy. We had lines around the block, but the thing is, we were not vertically integrated at the time. We didn't have a grow. And there was very quickly an extreme flower shortage in Illinois. And so you would get deliveries from, giant public companies whose name will go unmentioned, and they will show up with a delivery and they would say, hey, we have suppositories for you and one flavor of gummies. And so we didn't have flour at all. And so one of the first things that became really important strategically for us was understanding the importance of really controlling our destiny via controlling the quality of the product that we were selling. And so very quickly it became a priority that we needed to have a grow, and that we needed to have control of the ultimate product that we're giving people. And so that was part of it in the early days. But yeah, building a team and kind of growing up as a company generally was the name of the game.
Well, so, but like you said, it became clear, like, the rules had changed and you needed to control the quality of the product you had to put in front of your customers, and not let some large public companies, push you around as a retailer because they had all the supply, to
Hmm.
be able to compete, within the state there, because again, there's this, it is the land of big public companies and big private companies in cannabis that have raised institutional money and, you know, really, built in a different way, right?
Yeah.
Built quickly and, you know,
Illinois is funny because Illinois is a land of, and cannabis is a land of giants and little guys. By that I mean, you're right, right? That so many of the biggest and most successful, and some of them unsuccessful, but formerly biggest companies in cannabis were born here, right? Verano and Cresco and GTI and PharmaCann, rest in peace, etc. They started here and they operate here and they're very large and very powerful. Also, Illinois had this incredible social equity push and program that resulted in a lot of also really small operators, right? There's a number of real mom and pop, one dispensary, social equity operator trying to survive that exists in Illinois in a way that it doesn't necessarily exist in other states. And real, craft growers or infusers that are like on their own operating these like single operations, which is a really tough thing to do. And we live in this strange middle in which we're not the big guys and we're not the little guys anymore. We're like this like very strange medium-sized company in this market. But you're right to call out that this is the land where many of the MSOs first got started.
you mentioned you have 9 stores, you have the license for 10, you're trying to find location. Growth has occurred, to my knowledge, very organically and methodically, where you and your operating team has put everything, kept the chips on the table, right? Like,
Yes.
ran businesses that could generate revenue in order to propel growth.
Hmm.
And doing that in this industry where we have to keep track of all the things all the time, is not very many groups have been able to do that successfully to get to scale of 9 stores, right? But, were you always thinking, are you on the timeline of when you thought you'd get to 10 stores?
I think one of the things that happens or that happened with cannabis, you and I were talking about this I think right before we got started, but you come from the world of tech. And I think in the early fever days of 2021, when like cannabis stocks were really hot, et cetera, everyone was acting like cannabis was a tech company in which there would be infinite explosive growth. And all you needed to do was get big enough quickly enough. And there was always going to be someone that was going to come and save you. And so you didn't need to build a business for the long run. You needed to build a business to flip it. And I think a lot of people did that, right? Growth at any price.
Yes.
You think about the price that people paid for money because they expected there's going to be rescheduling or legalization or safe banking or whatever you call it. I remember my very first day working in cannabis was actually back in the days that the ArcView conference still existed back in 2019. And the talk of the town in that ArcView is that safe banking was about to happen like any second now. I mean, that
Yeah.
was 7 years ago. And so everyone's trying to make deals and expand because like prices will go crazy because Miller is going to come and acquire us all. And so I think the companies that built growth at any price because they expected that someone else was going to be left holding the bag. Well, it's been a much slower process than everybody expected for that like full normalization of cannabis. And so that wasn't sustainable in a longer time frame versus, nuEra is a family company. This is our family's legacy, right? And we're building something that is intended to last and is intended to like be around for a long time. So we weren't willing to take those kinds of risks and to take that kind of money because we were building a business that made sense, not a business that we were hoping someone else would buy and wouldn't be our problem anymore. And so the growth has been slower and steadier, but it has been justifiable. We have really focused on building a business whose fundamentals support themselves as much as we can.
Yeah, and there's phases of the industry, right? It was let's get as many licenses as we can, figure out how to make money later, and then same time it happened for like the tech industry, it happened for cannabis like doubly, which was
hmm
how are you going to make money? What is your plan to make money, right? And that flipped the narrative.
I mean, and you're selling a highly regulated agricultural commodity, right? It's more like agriculture like anything else, right? It's tough. It's tough and it's tough to be differentiated and compete in that environment. And so, yeah, you just got to make sure it actually pencils out.
I heard something, and what is your take on this? There's not really any license caps in Illinois.
You are stepping into what is currently very controversial territory. So, what's been happening in Illinois is a lot of people are setting up these management services agreements that are legally not an ownership stake and therefore not prohibited from being above the 10. But there was a framework, and I don't know exactly, how different companies are structuring it, but they're essentially controlling via management these different licenses. But the omnibus bill that was just approved the omnibus bill was just voted last week, and I'm keeping in mind here that people might be listening to this later. So it was the very last day of May. An omnibus bill was passed, and one of the provisions in there is a very, very serious tightening of how those management agreements and all of those, various supply and relationships are going to be approved. That hasn't been signed by the governor yet as of today when we're speaking. I anticipate that is going to be. And no one in the industry knows what in practice that's going to mean for all of those deals that have been set up, right? So I think that there's much to be figured out in the next couple of months about how that's enforced, how that's interpreted, and how that ultimately affects the bets that some of those larger companies have been making that we're letting them control more than 10 dispensaries at a time.
I mean, you get a market to a certain size. Like even though Illinois, to my knowledge, it isn't growing anymore in terms of sales. Like it's been fair, even though I think it had a good start to the year compared to last year, if I'm not mistaken,
hmm
it's been flat to down over the last 2 to 3 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And for reasons that I think are pretty clear,
Missouri,
Missouri, more than Missouri, Michigan,
yep.
and hemp, right? And I think there's like three very clear reasons uh, for that kind of stalling of the growth. I mean, you look at the Michigan numbers, or the number of dispensaries right in Buffalo. It's pretty crazy, and I think it's been one of the things that's really affected the growth of the Illinois market.
Yeah. Well, I think being in the middle, not like the big corporate, but not like a very small single site operation.
Hmm.
There's something special about being part of the team at nuEra. And I want to get into that. But one more question is, talk to me about with Kentucky, why that market made sense. You mentioned location of it, but obviously, over the course of the existence of the business, you stayed very focused on Illinois and execution in Illinois because you're trying to grow out to the max footprint. Was multi-state or national expansion of the brand always kind of the goal?
Yeah, I think it has always been the goal in the similar way to retail expansion or expansion within Illinois, which is to say we want to grow, but we want to grow methodically and slowly and in a way that is sustainable and makes sense. Our bet on Kentucky, as you mentioned, some of it had to do with geography, and then some of it had to do with the way that the market was set up there. It's a fairly restricted, limited markets state that is going to, we hope, grow steadily. I think it's a state that had the right demographics and most importantly, license setup that we think could let it grow at a state that will prevent a Michigan or Oregon style bubble. That makes it very hard for operators to succeed. And so the bet is a long-term bet, meaning it's going to be a slow market at first as the patient counts go up, as the infrastructure of the entire cannabis ecosystem is built up, as growers get up and running, and so we have more product availability. A firm bet on a steady, well thought out, well managed
There's a
growth in
lane.
that state.
There's a lane. There's a
Yeah.
lane there that, might take a while to get there, but the way that
Hmm.
it's set up allows for you to operate and have a bunch of businesses within a state licensed medical program be sustainable.
Right.
And ultimately, I've heard this before. Sometimes you think about Kentucky, trying to compete with some of the zero tax states around it, like you have a big budget gap, so there's a world where by the end of the decade they are legalizing for adult use just for the tax benefit,
Hmm.
because they need the revenue, and who knows, right? Other most states have followed that path at some point, some very quickly, like in Missouri, and some a lot slower, right?
Well, and I think one of the things that remains to be seen, David, is how the transition in a post hemp loophole world is going to look like politically. Because what you're going to have is a bunch of states that haven't had legal cannabis in the books, but have essentially had legal cannabis in practice for a number of years. And so you're in Tennessee, and the people of Tennessee are used to essentially a dispensary experience in which they can go to a shop, they can have options, they can buy something, they can use their card. They don't have to like call a scary dealer and feel like they're like engaging in some sort of illicit
Delivery service
transaction.
billboards will
They
drive
are
you.
used, yeah, they're used to billboards and storefronts, and like they are used to this being a normal part of life. And when that starts going away, as we assume it will, and certainly as I expect it will, come November, that that vacuum is going to have a political impact, and I think it might result in an acceleration of the number of states that open up a path to legal cannabis, especially, of course, with rescheduling to medical. But medical is always the first step in that big cultural shift that opens up the world for a legalized market.
What's it like having a retail store in Buffalo Trace country? I mean, like the probably one of the most expensive pieces of real estate in the entire wine and spirits industry in the United States is in Frankfort, Kentucky. You know,
Yeah.
has there been any interesting dynamic there?
Well, the most interesting dynamic to me is that it's the most delightful store that we have to visit. So that's been really fun. Kentucky is a awesome place. We get to go there. The KCIA, which is the industry association there, will host their meetings at Keeneland and the horse races. And it's just like absolutely gorgeous and fun. And there's so many unique cultural things to Kentucky. Kentucky is one of those places with like an intense and real sense of place. They have a type of music and a type of booze and a type of food and a type of accent and a sport that they're into. And like everything is very itself. And I love that. And so I would say one of the things about having a dispensary in Frankfurt is like, I am delighted when I have to go there for work. So that's been fun. But the truth is like from like a bourbon interaction perspective, I have been very surprised by how welcoming, your mental image of a state like Kentucky that's a little bit more conservative in an early medical market where this is still a new thing and people are a little bit nervous about is that there would be a lot more resistance. In the early days of cannabis in Illinois, when we were setting up our medical stores back in 2014, 2015, it was an all-out fight to try to place a store. Our medical store in Chicago was the very last medical store to open in the state. And it's not, if you've ever seen it, it's not in a very great location. And it's not in a beautiful building. It doesn't have parking. It's kind of an industrial area because it's the only place they would let you go. Because you'd go and try to get zoning and everyone was acting like cannabis was some combination of, like
Prison.
vice, porn shop, prison, casino. Like no one wanted this in their neighborhood. But it was, and I expected that because cannabis was new to Kentucky and because Kentucky is a more conservative place, that is the type of environment we would be coming into in Kentucky. And instead we found an incredibly open and hungry, welcoming to cannabis. So our Frankfurt store is probably like one of our like most beautiful. It's visible from the highway across the street from a brand new Target that they're building right next to the Walmart. Very, very central, active business district with all, every major chain, everything. There wasn't even a special use zoning. It was just allowable by right. And so that's been one of the surprises and I'm sure this might vary
Easy to
county
do
to
business
county.
there.
Yeah, this might vary county to county and like maybe some of the more rural parts of Kentucky, operators might be having issues. But in our experience in setting up a store in Frankfurt, it was much easier than I thought. Working with the city, working with the bank, getting the permits, it was very business friendly from the beginning. And that has been really interesting and welcome,
Refreshing
certainly.
after living in Illinois.
Yeah, yes.
No
Oh,
comment.
it's always funny because I'm always calling. I oversee a lot of our HR stuff, as you know, and I'm always calling our labor attorney because I have questions and I'm just like, okay, I want to, like, what am I doing? What about Kentucky? Like, I want to make sure I'm not doing something. And he's basically like, if you're complying with Chicago and Illinois rules, you're like way, way, way more than covered in Kentucky because everything is a lot easier from that perspective there.
Well, if you make it here, you make it anywhere, right? They
Exactly.
said about
Exactly.
Illinois cannabis.
Yeah.
Okay, so 300 plus brave souls attached to the ship for Botany Bay and nuEra at this point, right?
Uh-huh.
What do you look for when you hire for your team?
That's a good question. Obviously it depends a lot on the role and like philosophically has changed a little bit over time. I think one of the big questions when you're hiring in cannabis is always how much weight you're placing on someone that comes from the industry or not, especially when you're hiring for a role that's not cannabis specific. If you're hiring for a cultivator, of course you need an experienced cannabis cultivator. But if you're hiring someone in your finance team or your HR team or your marketing team, the question is, how transferable are those skills from other industries to cannabis? And I think that my thinking about that has evolved a little bit over time. I think part of the reason it's evolved a little bit over time is as the industry gets more mature, you're starting to get a lot more people that have like serious careers in the cannabis industry. And there's a lot bigger pool, but it's hard to prepare people coming from other industries for the additional challenges that they're going to have coming into this industry because you might think you're hiring someone for your HR team and who cares if you've managed HR issues? Who cares if you know about cannabis or you don't? Well, but the truth is every single tool that you're going to use that you're used to using, you can't use anymore. That HRIS system that you loved, they won't work with you. That, broker that you loved won't work with you. And so there's a level of preparation, I think, in getting people ready to be ready for the challenge and to be ready to be open and enthusiastic about the culture. Like I said, I don't come from the cannabis culture. I don't come from that world, but I have learned that it is extremely important to our employees and to our team that you recognize that passion and that culture and you respect it and you understand that it has to be part of it. And so when people are kind of dismissive of it or think of it too much as like widgets, it could be hard for them to fit into a team.
I agree with you. It's, if somebody like, oh, it's just like CPG, it's just like retail, it's just like
Hmm.
agriculture, or you think it's just one of those things. It's actually elements of all those things combined into one in a functioning business. And
Yeah.
so someone who is entrepreneurial by nature understands what it means to be in a startup, like not to somebody who's, big company, and you just have to be uncomfortable. Like you have to, as a mid-stage career professional, if you're coming from another established career in another industry, you have to be ready to have to resharpen the tools in your belt to be effective in this industry while learning how to work with different types of people you never had to work with before. And for
Hmm.
some people, that's a lot of like humility and inward looking that's just not they're not able to do,
Hmm.
because they've had successful careers in other places. They don't need to, right? So, but for the right people that are, best when they're uncomfortable. They're fully unlocked as professionals, and finding those right people is one of the reasons why Flower Hire has been around for 10 years, and we're still going strong.
Yeah. I think my sweet spot is someone who's, I want to be their second job in cannabis. So, like, this is my dream candidate. Well, say you're hiring someone for your retail team, a district manager or a GM or something. If it's someone that has had their entire career in cannabis, because it's such a young industry, I feel like there's a whole level of sophistication that other companies have nailed for a really long time that they haven't gotten a chance to learn. But I also don't want to be their first introduction to then the whole world of cannabis, because what I've had, especially in retail, will be people that are just like, this is widgets, I don't care. And then they don't know how to connect with the team. They don't know how to connect with the customers and the patients, etc. But I prefer someone if you tell me, hey, I come from, 10 years of experience in this like major national retail chain. And in fact, that's the history of like Davina Capalupo, who's our CRO, and she was with Express in limited brands for, Fry Boots, et cetera. She had a long, very serious career in retail. And so she knows all of those tools that have been developed for 100 years in that industry. And that's incredibly powerful, right? But that shell shock of coming into cannabis for the first time can be really hard for people. And so my ideal candidate is someone that went through that shell shock, decided that they loved it, decided to stick around, and now they're coming into their next cannabis job. That's like my like dream candidate. It's like long, successful career in some other industry, specializing in the thing I need you to specialize on, but already you tried out cannabis, you know it's crazy, and you still love it, and you want to stick around. That's the dream candidate.
That's the unicorn, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and ultimately, it's a big village out there now of people that worked in the cannabis industry. I call it a village because I think it's more appropriate, but 500,000 people currently working in the industry, right?
That's
And so it is possible to hire somebody that comes in on day one with a playbook and ideally is still willing to tweak that playbook, but understands the fundamentals and can hit the ground running, right?
yeah.
That exists, and that did not exist, 5 years ago. Culture. Okay. So as a recruiter, as a headhunter, we've been around for a while, seen a lot, and never spoken to any current or former employee of your organization that has anything negative to say, which says a lot, right?
Wow.
And then you hear a lot just being a service provider for the space. It's a neutral third party service provider. No one's ever said anything negative about working with you commercially either, right? So you're doing something special, right? But I think they're all related, and I think they all come back to culture. So talking about building culture in cannabis where it is crazy and hectic, and how do you do that?
Well, I don't know. I am so happy to hear that it's working. We try really hard. I think one of the things that's particular about our team, and one of the reasons we've been able to survive for a long time, as we were talking about earlier, is we're actually a really small leadership team. And we're really involved at every level. We have, when we'll talk to other companies of similar size, we're always amazed at how small our executive and leadership team is. And so we have really close contacted knowledge of everything that's happening at the company because we don't have the luxury of several layers of middle management separating us from the day-to-day reality of what's happening. And so we are paying very close attention and participating in things that are happening at the company, not only vertically, but horizontally as well. We're like pretty interconnected. We call it having the right hand talk to the left hand. So what happens a lot in cannabis companies will be you have a retail team and you have a cultivation team, and they each do their own thing and they don't even talk to each other. And it's so obvious when you talk to their teams that they're not sharing strategy, they're not coordinating,
Blaming each other for all their problems.
blaming each other. Because we have such a small team, I think we have oversight and insight into all of it, number one. And number two, I think, and that's like the truth, it's because this is a family company, we just have a level of ownership that, and like, I mean ownership not in the literal equity sense. I mean ownership in like, I own these problems and care about these problems, because it isn't a job. It isn't just like, whatever, this thing happened, someone will figure it out. If everything goes out the window, I'll just go get another job. It's not an option, right? Like, this has to work out, and we must make it work out, and we will show up as many times as we need to make it work out. And so I think that level of ownership is something that the team at all levels sees and respects and reacts to. So I'm happy to hear that that's the perception.
Well, thank you so much for everything today. My final question, which I like to ask folks, is okay, consider me just a dreamer, an entrepreneur. I want to get into the cannabis industry now. I want to figure out how to get a license and open up my dream store. I want to build a brand, or I just want to start a recruiting firm selling into cannabis, whatever it is, right? Like, what is your advice for an entrepreneur that's like, this is my calling in cannabis? What do you tell them?
I just feel like that I can only think of jokes. I'm like, how to make a small fortune in cannabis? Start with a large fortune.
I like that. It's good.
I don't know. I think if someone is just getting started and getting into cannabis, I think my advice would go back to some of the themes that we've hit on here, which is think of it and buckle up as something that you're doing for the long haul, right? I think that people hear cannabis and they hear drug money almost, like easy money somehow, especially people. I mean, those of us that have been in the industry for a long time now, we know that. But if the advice is for someone that's just coming in, it's not a quick success. It is, if it's something that you're coming to build, be prepared that it's going to be a long, steady, painful at times, like long-term commitment to building something. And that's the way to think about it, right? You have to be in it for the long haul for it to work out.
I agree with you. My advice is get a job. Like, if you've never worked in the industry before, like, get a job, whether it's a store or wherever. Just get a sense of it and feel it out. Because sometimes the best opportunity is to be a high performer in an organization like nuEra that will take care of you and give you the opportunity to move forward. And from a career perspective, and work in an industry you want to, versus starting your own thing, which sounds great, but it'd be very hard to make money.
Yeah, and it's been a rough few years for the industry in general, but I do think working in it is understanding the problems. If you're entrepreneurially minded, I do think that there continue to be so many gaps in services and products for the cannabis industry, because we don't, maybe rescheduling is going to change this a little bit, but because there's so many excellent tools that exist for other industries that don't yet exist for us. The joke is always, for instance, how tragic software is for anything that has to do with cannabis. And so I think to think about the classic thing of selling shovels in a gold rush, a lot of people made really big, bold investments in that, and that has failed. But I do think that there's still a lot of room to think about, if you're passionate about cannabis, but you have other skills that you have developed. Cannabis is a large industry where the only thing isn't just the plant, right? There is a great need for people with legal experience or with accounting experience or with marketing experience or with logistics experience. I mean, that it is a wide ecosystem of opportunities that if someone is coming in from a different area, there's room for that in cannabis.
As a service provider, I agree. Laura Jaramillo, thank you so much for joining us today. This was great. Covered a lot of ground. Thank you for sharing your story. I know that you're very busy day to day, so I'm sure the audience will appreciate it. Have a great rest of the year. Let's see how rescheduling plays out, all those questions in Illinois. So much to be excited about.
Yeah. All right. And thank you so much for having me. This was fun.